Hi, this is Corey Nelson, pastor at First Presbyterian Church, and I'm really grateful to have a good friend and colleague in ministry, Chris Bruno, for this interview. Chris is the founder and director of Restoration Counseling Center here in Fort Collins, and last week, Chris and his wife, Beth, were hosting a similar kind of call with a larger group of pastors and church leaders, helping us reflect on how we're navigating this coronavirus crisis and what it means for us mentally, spiritually, emotionally. And I thought at the time this might be a really helpful conversation, at least in part, to offer to the wider church as well. So I asked Chris if he'd be willing to spend a few minutes with us, and then we'll share this on the church Facebook page so that others have access to some of these reflections and potentially some of the resources that might be helpful as well. So Chris, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Corey, so much. It's so good to be with you today. And thanks for holding all that you're holding on behalf of the church and the greater community as we all are navigating through this like totally uncharted waters. So thanks for letting me be here.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, you know, I wonder, as you have been reaching out to church leaders and clients and others, what are you hearing from folks? How are people reacting, and sort of what is the initial response right now that you're helping people to walk through?
Yeah, Corey, it's actually really all over the board. Some people are totally fine and they're just like, this is way blown out of proportion. What's the big deal? And other people are completely crumbling, like on the other end of the spectrum, right? Completely crumbling and like, I am so afraid of what even today is going to bring. I don't know how to make it through the day. So, and then there's everywhere in between,
Right.
right? So I think the thing that is important, I think, for us to be mindful of is that the world that was 1 month ago is not the world that is now. And that everyone's reactions are going to be, we need to both validate everyone's reactions and also listen to everyone's reactions, because their reality is their reality on how they're engaging. And there's a lot of factors that go into how they're reacting to the situation currently, that we can get into here in this conversation or later. But just to hold that reality of, hey, this is, where are you today, is the question that I'm always asking people.
Yeah, that's great. And certainly we've seen that at First Presbyterian as we've been reaching out, trying to reach out to every household. And even the reality from week to week changes in people's lives. People that were fine a week ago and thought, you know, this is really going to be okay. Suddenly, you know, one or two things in their lives or the lives of a loved one has shifted. And now suddenly even their situation has changed. So I'm thinking about, you know, what are the kinds of realities and reactions that you're encountering, that we can help people just to name and normalize in their lives right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to emphasize what you just said there real quick, and that is that what is true today is different than what was true yesterday, and because it's an ever-evolving process. And I think what is evolving is the level of loss that we are experiencing today versus yesterday, right? So when there's new things like a job layoff, that's a loss that I didn't have yesterday that I might have today, or someone is sick that I know or have heard of, that now it's getting a little bit closer, a little bit closer, a little bit closer. And so the importance, I think, for us to name is, what are the losses that we are experiencing? And I think in the Christian world, we're often like, well, God is good and God is in control. And we have these actual truths that that in many ways can be helpful. And yet when the world feels like it's out of control, or I don't even know what I can anticipate tomorrow to look like, it doesn't necessarily feel that way, right? And I think we actually need to name where we're at today and the losses that we're experiencing today, and maybe tomorrow. And even, you know, in some of the work that we're doing is this idea of anticipatory suffering, where I had a loss yesterday and I don't know what I might be asked to do today or tomorrow. And so it affects me. Like, am I going to lose my job next week? Will affect me today, not just next week. And so we have to attend to those parts of our lives and our hearts now for what it is right now.
Yeah. I've been reminded often in the last week, and it's a quote or a variation on a quote that's been attributed to lots of people over time, but it's this idea that it's not so much change that people resist, it's loss that accompanies change, and then the grief that accompanies that loss. And
Mm,
that we're really walking with people through lots of different kinds of grief right now based on the losses they've experienced. And that's that sense you just named of anticipatory grief, anticipating even the losses that are still yet to come, the unknown, the uncertainty that we're in right now. How long is this going to last? What will the impact actually be on me, on my loved ones, on my
yeah.
church, on my community, on the national economy? And so helping people to, as you begin to reference, even out of our, or maybe especially out of our faith traditions, um, understand the role that our faith plays in accompanying us, um, to to sit in loss and lament, right?
Mhm. Oh, absolutely. And when we think about the God of all comfort, and as Paul talks about that in Corinthians, right, that he is the God who brings us comfort. But even in that passage, we can see that it is comfort in our afflictions, not comfort out of our afflictions. Is that his movement towards us is to join us in the suffering and in the loss and in the grief, right? And to be with us there, and calls our community to be with us there. That's what brings us comfort, is the witness of God in the midst of our anxieties or struggles or sufferings or griefs or losses, whatever those might be, rather than this really kind of false understanding that God will remove the suffering from us, and that is what his comfort is. It's the joining of us in the midst of that I think is really important for us to be aware of, because it's ever evolving, it's ever changing,
Yeah.
right? And then the other thing, Corey, too, is that we don't do well with lament in the church. We just overall in the American church, lament and grief is something that's kind of reserved for the moments of literal death, where we're at a funeral. We know we have still have some concept of grief there, but we don't really know what it means to grieve losses, like a job or like a spring break vacation, or summer plans, or the loss of the birthday party that you had been hoping to have, right, that now you can't have. Those are actual losses, and we don't really know how to lament those. And there's differing levels of grief that we would enter into depending on the significance of the loss. But I think that's really an important part of grief being God's gift to us to digest the loss that we're experiencing. And if we don't name the losses, then we can't actually digest them.
Yeah. And I think especially in our faith traditions, that's so important to remind people that to allow themselves to experience and to sit in lament
Hmm.
is part of our faithful response as people of faith. That's not a lack of faith, it's a part of the journey of faith. And it's, maybe not a coincidence in a sense that we're about to enter into Holy Week.
Yeah.
And this time, particularly in many of the ecumenical traditions, where we really invite people, both in the season of Lent and then especially in Holy Week, to pause in a moment of uncertainty, of anxiety, and that it's not only okay to be there, it is in fact a faithful part of our journey. We don't have to worry about moving too quickly out of that, right?
Well, absolutely. I love how you just said it's part of the journey, because it is actually in the lament that when we name that and invite Jesus into that space, that is where we come to know him even deeper.
Yeah.
And as we talk about Holy Week, right, Easter Sunday is not Easter Sunday unless you've gone through the movement towards the death on Good Friday. And without death, Easter Sunday does not have joy,
Hmm.
in the resurrection. And so I think the lament and the joy are very, very close together. It's almost like two sides of the same coin. that we must know, if we want to know joy, we must know lament. And if we want to know gratitude, we also need to know what grief is. And I love that space that I don't think it's a coincidence that it is, the coronavirus space right now is overlapping with Lent and Holy Week and Easter. I think there's a beautiful invitation that God has for us here.
It may not feel beautiful for some in the moment, for sure, as
No,
a real challenge, but you're right. It's the opportunity here is extraordinary.
yeah. Well, and I want to say beautiful often kind of conjures up these like joyful springing through the meadows. It's this like awesome, rainbows and unicorns time. That's not necessarily what I mean. It is this space of beauty and coming to know the heart of Jesus even deeper than we could have before.
Yeah. Chris, to shift a little bit, I wonder, as you're reflecting on some of these realities with church leaders, clients, others in your life, what are some of the ways that you're encouraging people to make choices to live into this new normal that just help people navigate sort of the day-to-day?
Yeah. Corey, I think the most important thing is establishing some level of daily rhythms. And there's part of that in the church tradition of, liturgies that have been written or established over time, and even church calendars and all that. But God is a God of seasons and rhythms. And I think when we feel like the world is out of control, it is helpful for us to lean into some good rhythms and invite Jesus into that. So what I mean by that is some rhythms that maybe you had established before, right, to carry on as best you can with some of those rhythms, whether it's an exercise rhythm or a daily devotional rhythm, or times and days when you're meeting with your family for meals and those kinds of things, those typical rhythms. But at this point, it might be better, even to increase the level of rhythms that you have. And can you establish, for example, like a rhythm of grief and gratitude, like we've been talking about, where you're sitting journaling or looking out the window praying or whatever, and you're actually naming your griefs and naming your gratitudes. In our family, one of the things that we've done is after dinner, before our kind of evening comes in, is that I'll put on two worship songs, and everyone will be in their own space in the living room with their journal. And then I'll offer a writing prompt to the family. Which, is just like, think about this. So the other day it was raining, and my writing prompt was, the rain reminds me of blank. And then during the songs, it was just this soulful kind of engagement with, Lord, where would you like to take me? Another writing prompt was, today I lament blank. So something like that. And whether it's as a community or family or whatever, some rhythms to get you moving through your day. I don't know if you're like me, but they all kind of feel the same at this point. I don't even know what day it is other than what my calendar is telling me, basically. And it's just important for those rhythms. And then also to establish connection with someone else every day. Someone outside of what your quarantine stay-at-home space is, someone on the outside, to have a conversation, a parent, a brother, sister, a friend, someone on the outside, just so that you're like, your world, which has suddenly become very small, is not as small. And I want to be careful with that, because the world has become really small in our physical space, but it's really big in the social media and news space. And I want to make sure that we're modifying that to make sure we have outside connections with actual real people. Right? Because it's just not good to be alone.
For sure. Yeah, those are both really helpful. My wife Miriam is a person who really craves schedule and rhythms, and part of how we've navigated that, we actually got a whiteboard and whiteboard markers. And one of the things we do either at the end of the day or first thing in the morning over coffee is she will get those out, and with color-coded pens for her schedule, my schedule, and our schedule, we will write a full schedule for the day. And we give each other space and grace in that for, times to play and some flexibility, but it's really been helpful for us because as you've said, it's easy to lose track of, what day of the week it is and what's happening in our lives. And so even being more on top of that than usual has been great for us.
Yeah.
The other thing we've discovered in this time is that, probably like a lot of people, I have, lots and lots of friends around the country on social media, people I've met over the course of my life, extended family, etc., who in more ordinary times, I would only connect with if there were something that happened that was a catalyst that prompted me to connect with them.
Sure.
And now I've realized this is as good a time as any. It's a more important time than any. And so I have been on the phone or on, for people who have access to the internet and are comfortable using technologies like we're using right now. It's been a great way for people to newly connect or to reconnect with people in ways that they might not have otherwise, which has been a real gift.
Yeah, for sure. And it is the best time, right? And here's the thing that even this morning I was talking with a client about um, what you just said, under normal circumstances. Uh, we're not under normal circumstances anymore. And whether you would have talked to that person or whatever because of a wedding or like I said, a big birthday or some other reason why you would reach out to that friend, this is as good a reason as any to reach out to that friend because we're not under normal circumstances. There's 5 quick things I'd love to just share, and it spells out the word spine as far as rhythms go. Okay, just the core of who you are to establish some good rhythms. The first is sleep. The second is pleasure. The third is intimate conversation. The fourth is nutrition. And the fifth is exercise. So if people can be thinking through with your whiteboard kind of idea, what will be my spine today, right? How will I actually attend to my sleep and not just watch TV into the nighttime? Or how will I make sure I get up out of bed and take care of my sleep so that I'm well? Pleasure is like, do you listen to a symphony? Or do you go to the mountains? Do you play with your dog? Like something that just like brings you pleasure. Do you make that special meal kind of thing right now to bring pleasure into the day? I feel like God has given us pleasure for a recreative kind of thing for our bodies. Intimate conversation is what we talked about, reaching out to those friends, making sure it's not just like reading social media posts, right? But actual conversation. And then nutrition and exercise is making sure that you're taking care of your body. Because I think, there's been a lot of posts I've seen and things people have mentioned like, oh, my post-quarantine body is going to be big and puffy versus where I was before. And
Right.
we take care of our bodies in that. So that can be a helpful thing to think through, like on your daily structure, like what will my day look like?
Yeah, that's awesome. And maybe finally, Chris, just wondering, for people who are listening to this and, as you say, maybe, all over the map in terms of where they're at in the spectrum, and maybe in a very different place a week from now, even having watched this today, what are some of the resources that people might want to take advantage of? Actual people resources of people in the community, given what our options are at the moment, resources they might find online, resources they might find in our faith tradition, where are some of the places people might turn?
Yeah, well, I'd first want to turn them directly back to the church, right? I feel like Jesus left the church on earth for times such as this,
Right.
for the community to be the community it was designed to be. So that's where I'd say, what does the church have to offer? What are the people, the pastors, the staff? The staff haven't stopped being staff, right? The caregivers haven't stopped being caregivers, to look back into the community as best as possible. Otherwise, when we have limited access physically to care, is a time where care is most needed, really in our world, to navigate through the unknowns and anxieties and fears and griefs and losses that we just talked about. So I think there's a lot of spaces, even here at Restoration, of someone to connect to, a counselor, a spiritual director, a therapist, different people and different spectrums of care that we have that are all online right now. And so people can reach out to us to do that, if they'd like that one-on-one, or some support groups. And in spaces like what we're doing right now, right, there's the possibility of being in a group with other people to process,
Yeah.
to think through, like, what am I facing and how am I engaging it, in support groups. So for us, all of that right now can be found on our website, and or through careduringcorona.com. So if people want to go there, we've got some online offerings, as well as that individual space. The other thing I would ask people to maybe consider is, I mentioned it before, leaning into the church fathers and mothers of the past. Like what prayers, maybe you don't have language for prayer right now, but could you borrow some language of someone from the past, and just, the saints and those that have gone before us have given us some great, beautiful prayers for times like these to maybe find as a resource. There's no limit either to like online um, uh, sermons and books and all of that people can access as well, even from, wherever they are.
Yeah.
For sure. I do think the important thing is to make sure that we're limiting the amount of news intake and replacing that with actual connection intake,
Yeah.
from people. And a group is a great place to do that.
Good. I know for us, it's so tempting to just be on that 24-hour news cycle and wanting to know what's happening now, what's happening now, what's happening now. And so the discipline and the intentionality to turn that off is both difficult and so necessary. And then to find those other pieces, other, the book, at least for us, I know I always have this stack of books on my nightstand that I'm going to get to someday. Well, if it's not today, I don't know when it's going to be. So really taking that time to find other places to nurture our minds, our spirits, our bodies. That's great. And certainly we will encourage folks to reach out to Restoration or, to others. And part of what I've realized is that the opportunity is that there are so many resources, potential resources out there. And what we're trying to do at First Press is not so much create a lot of new resources as much as be curators rather than creators. And the curating process is trying to help people by offering, here's a few that we feel like with confidence we can recommend and know that they're going to be high quality, they're going to be meaningful, they're going to be accessible to you. And in that, not that people, of course, aren't free to find other things, but at least it provides a starting place. And I know that's true at Restoration as well, for which I'm really grateful.
Yeah. That's with your comment about the news cycle too, like that's also a great approach to have to the news cycle. I know for me, like I listened to, in my commute, I would listen to one or two podcasts or news podcasts on the way and on the way home.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have a commute anymore. And now I have all this access to a lot more news that, before I had a limited amount of time. So it's also a good idea to curate the time that you have that you're devoting to news, and maybe choose, this is going to be the highlight news that I listen to in the morning and the evening, and that's all.
Yeah.
But I love too the curation of the experiences, because there's no shortage of them. It's important people know, like, this is actually going to be worth my time, worth my money, worth my effort, and all that. And Corey, I want to speak to, like, there's a lot of people right now that are that have this increased spaciousness in time because of what's happened. We're quarantined at home. We're not going out. We're not having all these outside meetings and all that. So there's this increased space to get to that stack of books. But there's a lot of people that have a really shrunken amount of time because kids are home. Business is now happening while we're trying to have kids at home. We're now doing schooling. We're like doing all that other stuff. And so just in the sense of, like, there is no space to do those. That's where the curated is. If there is one thing, do one thing, right? And make sure that you are doing one thing and not trying to fit 1,000 more things into the already 1,000 things that you've just inherited because school's out or work's out, kind of thing.
That's right. Yeah. And I think about, our healthcare workers and others who are more busy and in some ways more frantic than ever, as they
Yeah.
navigate this space. And
Yeah.
so trying to make sure that we pause to pray for them and care for them in whatever ways we can, support them, offer them our gratitude. And as you say, offer them, more precisely and carefully ways that they can carve out, what may be minutes for them that are hours for others. That's
Sure.
helpful. Good.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, thank you for your time today. I'm so grateful. I'm grateful to have you as a colleague in ministry, and grateful to know that folks like you and your staff are out there providing care alongside and through the church as well.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for the invitation to be with you today.